All right, let's do it. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you happen to be someone who is listening to the show for the first time, I want to say welcome to you. Everyone else, what's up? How are we doing? If you have been around of late, you know I have been off of my normal routines. And this week is no exception. I am recording this so much earlier in the week than I ever normally would. And that is because I am going to be away this weekend. I am going on a family camping trip. That's right. A family camping trip. And weeks ago, when my wife came to me and she told me that several other families in our friend group were all planning to do this camping trip together, and they wanted to know if we wanted to join them, my initial thought was absolutely not. Because I know nothing about camping. I grew up in the suburbs. I moved to a big city. I know nothing about camping. One time in my life, my sister who lives in Washington took me camping, but I didn't even have to do anything. They did the tent. They cooked the food. I didn't have to carry shit. I just hung around and made conversation. I don't know if that really counts as camping. And now I've got these 2 kids and a wife, and we're supposed to go camping. I don't know what to do. But this isn't really full-on camping either. I know some friends of mine who would really call this more like glamping. I mean, we don't have any electricity, but I don't have to do the tent. There's already like a structure, like a tent structure. And there's even a bed in there. So it's not like it's full-on, but still, I am so completely out of my element. I have no clue. But I have been in touch with the other parents, and I know at least one other parent, and they don't know shit either. The other family that we're going to are like hardcore campers, though. And they sent this email out, freaked everybody out. But you know what? It's fine. It's going to be good. We're not even going to be there that long. It's going to be fun, I think. Hopefully my daughters will like not be annoying and miserable, and they'll like have fun and it'll be good. We'll see. Again, I don't know. The point of all of this is that I'm not going to be here to do this like I normally would, so I'm trying to do it now, and certainly feels a little bit off of my usual mode. And I feel pressed for time because it's late. We were down there getting sleeping bags together and whatever, and I got to get this done before we go tomorrow. So it is what it is. Sometimes this happens, you know? Sometimes I don't get to have the time that I would need or want to do these things that I do. I think it's important, though, that we're going on this trip. It feels like some kind of last huzzah or something, some kind of last memory making of this time that we were so sequestered together, you know? And I think it's significant that it's like not in the house. We're going to go on an adventure. I just hope that my daughters aren't horrible. Send me a little prayer. I mean, by the time you hear this, we'll already be back. So it won't matter. Like I'll tell you if it went okay or not. I'm just, you know, it could go either way. Like they could really be having fun and like it, or they could be like bored and miserable and like not having fun and like a drag. But their friends are going to be there, so I think it's going to be okay. I think it's going to be okay. We're going on a family camping trip, and I'm making this happen because the show must go on. And I am very happy to be bringing you today's talk with Julie Smerdon. Julie and I had been in contact for some time. I was scheduled to teach a workshop at her space in Australia in 2020, and that had to get canceled. And I had always planned to record with her when I was there. And I think I was just holding out. I think I had in mind that I was still planning to go there. And I am. I'm still going to go. But I decided in the meantime, I really wanted to talk to her because we have a bunch of mutual friends. And I sort of knew that there was going to be a lot there. And there most certainly was. In fact, you'll hear at some point in this conversation, I start to, give some friendly, I wouldn't say advice, but as a friend, make some suggestions to Julie because she, like many of us, is looking at where we are now and trying to figure out what makes sense. She had to let go of her center, you'll hear, and she's going back to teaching, and like many of us, trying to figure out what makes sense and how to do that in a way that's true to her and what she does. So in any case, it was wonderful to talk with Julie, and I'm really excited that you're going to get to hear it today. Now, as I just mentioned, in this conversation, you will hear at some point, I mentioned to Julie that she should have a subscription service for her online classes. And if you've been around, you know that I really have been saying that a lot. It's a much longer conversation as to why I feel so strongly about that. But if you are a yoga teacher out there and you're doing online classes, even if you're going back to in-person classes and you're going to start doing hybrid classes or you're going to do both, I really believe that it only makes sense to be doing these online classes, setting up a subscription service. And you need a way to do that billing. And most people have like a website or some way that an e-commerce solution is offered as part of an already existing service, a bundled service. And I just need to tell you that I don't think that that's a very good idea for a lot of different reasons. And I want to encourage you, if you want to have a much longer, deeper conversation about this, you can join my Yoga of Business class. In fact, Julie, after this conversation, she jumped on. We've been talking about this stuff even more after this conversation. We've been continuing the conversation. And you can too if you want to join the Yoga of Business class. But even if you don't join the Yoga of Business class, even if you're already doing your own thing and you just need to set up the subscription service, maybe you're using something already, I don't know. But I want to recommend that you use Moonclerk. That's what I use. And I think that it's much better than all of the other payment processing services that I've used before. It's certainly helped streamline what I'm doing and allowed for me, frankly, to create a much more sustainable income base. So we really like the people over at Moonclerk, and we're really happy to be like partnering with them. So I want to encourage you to go check it out. And you can do me a favor by letting them know that we're sending you by going to jbrownyoga.com/Moonclerk. That's jbrownyoga.com/MOONCLERK, jbrownyoga.com/Moonclerk for doing your recurring payments or one-time payments, but I really use it for recurring payments. Definitely go check it out. Also, I want to mention that this episode is brought to you in support by Podcast Premium subscribers. People like Andrea Lodico and Chris Taylor. Shout out to you, Chris. Now, we started this premium subscription some while back because, frankly, we were doing ads, and at some point, doing ads sucks for a million different reasons. We created the Podcast Premium subscription as a way for people to not only show their support for the show, but create like a real service. Like the archive of the show is pretty extensive at this point. There's some pretty monumental conversations in there. So if you've been listening to the show and listening to the free feed and you want to have access to the full archive, or you just want to support us and help us keep doing this, becoming a podcast premium subscriber is a way to do it. We tried to set it up to make it as accessible as possible. It's a choose your rate. You can cancel at any time. And if you have no money, then just email us and we will send you a free account. No questions asked. But if you are in a position to give a little something, it's really the difference to something like this podcast. Like my ability to keep doing this the way that I'm doing it, it relies upon people who are willing to show their support. So thank you to everybody who's doing that. If you want to find out about becoming a podcast premium subscriber or the Yoga of Business class that I was talking about, or any of my stuff, live stream classes, teachers call, all of my stuff, everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay. I think that's it. I think we did it. I think that's going to just be it for now. I will touch base with you briefly on the other side, but let's do it, okay? I got to get a few more things together and get ready for this thing. And yeah, it's fine. Let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Julie Smerdon. Hello?
Good morning, afternoon, evening?
It is night for me. It's like 8 p.m. It's morning for you, eh?
Yeah, 10 a.m.
Okay, well, hi, Julie.
Jay, happy birthday.
Oh, yes, thanks. That was yesterday. It's nice of you to say that. I turned 49, which...
Yeah?
You know, I don't really feel 49, but...
Yeah, it's a bit like that.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
I can. I can hear you just fine.
Good, good.
Are you settled in? Are you settled in? You need any water? Need to do anything? You're ready to go?
I'm ready to go. I've got a little cup of tea here. It's freezing here. Yeah, and yeah, see, I'm ready to go.
We are on opposite poles because we're in the midst of a heat wave. So
yeah, we're having an Antarctic blast here.
Crazy.
I'm turning off my email. Right, there we
are. It's very hot, and I'm in my attic, and I had like kind of a day, and I won't go into it, but I didn't get to do any of like the preparatory things that I normally would have done. So I'm settling in this moment just with you.
And take a deep breath.
Well, I am. I'm doing that. I took a couple before I hit go and got on with you. I would also say that I am like sweating. It's so hot. So you're in the cold having a tea, and I'm having a good sweat because I don't want to have a fan on right next to the microphone.
Well, I'm sort of sweating too because I'm actually a little nervous.
You are? Why would you be nervous?
I don't know, because talking about yoga is like my favorite thing to do, but this is really an honor. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to speak with you. And I guess it's funny, for some reason in my mind, I feel like I know you better than I do, just because we had plans. Like we made plans. I was supposed to hang out with you.
Yeah.
Before the whole world shut down.
Oh my gosh, right?
And so I know we had some contact, but that's like over a year ago. Is that crazy?
I was trying to think. I think that that thing that we ended up doing online was right around a year ago now.
That's right. So I forgot. See, I even forgot about that.
Yeah.
I know that we had a plan for me to come hang out with you when I was supposed to be in Australia, and that got canceled. But then we did do it online. We did one thing, right?
Yeah.
No, that was great. A year ago. What happened to the last year? Do you have any idea?
Mate, no, not a clue.
My gosh.
It's do you get that whole thing where the dates get mixed up? Like I can't even remember what year. Was it 2019? Was it 2020? Was it?
I don't know. Well, my two girls are both like finishing. They have their last like 2 days of school. And
oh, bless.
And I guess that's a thing. Like when you're in school, there's that marking of time through the grades.
Yep.
It goes away after you get out of college or whatever.
Yeah, until you have kids, and then you're back in the academic cycle again.
That's right. Well, I guess for me, I always had it in mind. My plan was when I was going to see you in Australia, we would record for the show.
Yeah.
And that never happened. And I guess I was still always holding out. And I still do potentially have plans to go there again.
And I have plans to host you. So let's
We're going to make that happen. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, here we are, voice to voice at the very least.
Yeah.
And not to worry, nothing to be nervous about. I mean,
No, I know.
I've spoken to a bunch of people about you. Like you're kind of like a veteran in the Australian yoga world.
I'm excited to kind of trace with you too, because we've had kind of parallel paths, I think, different parts of the country. But, I love the whole concept of this whole idea of like what just happened in yoga over the last 25 years.
I know. Well, we started this conversation, what happened over the last year, but it is the last 25. I mean, I came into it probably maybe about 22 years ago. So, but even still, there certainly has been like, and I'm always using this word, like a trajectory that happened and kind of a wave of yoga into mainstream, as I've always said. And I just had some folks on this week, actually. I don't know if you heard them, the couple, Dave and Stacy, living in the van.
Oh, I did not hear that one, but I saw that.
I mean, they basically, started out in like a vinyasa. Well, first she started out in a fitness thing, which I think is maybe where you started too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then they got into like a vinyasa thing and they ended up opening 3 centers and training teachers. And then with the pandemic, they had to close and now they sold their house and they're like living in a van.
Awesome.
But I know you are a similar trajectory and I'm curious to hear it from you because I do know that there's parallels but differences on the other sides of the planet from my world and your world. So as I said, I know that you did start out in kind of like a fitness mode. Is that right?
Yeah, I've always been in some sort of movement, whether it was dance or, whatever, sports. But I have an autoimmune disorder and I was diagnosed at 13 with that. And so I was kind of in high school, particularly, I was in and out of hospital. And so after that, when I went to college, I discovered fitness. Like I discovered gym stuff. And at that time it was, aerobics and all that stuff with the, thong leotards and leg warmers and all that stuff. Thank God we didn't have smartphones back then. But, so that was kind of my way of controlling my body, I think, at that time. And I did have a really nice long time of remission. I had 3 kids and, I had this really vigorous fitness routine that on the outside it worked, but on the inside it wasn't really doing much for me. And part of that was yoga. So even back like in the mid 80s and early 90s, late 80s, there was like Lila Spolin on TV. And I just wanted to stretch because I thought that was a nice thing to do, to kind of augment the rest of the stuff that I was doing. And I'm pretty flexible naturally. So I didn't feel the need to do a lot of it, but I did do it and I liked it. And then, when yoga started to become a little bit more mainstream, you would see teachers in the gyms every now and then, or there are people, teaching in halls, like you've talked about, living rooms, that kind of thing. And I had a couple friends that were yoga teachers and I was just doing my fitness stuff. And then in my late 30s, I had a really bad flare up of this autoimmune condition and basically was housebound. I had 3 little kids. I was housebound for, 9 months maybe, before I ended up at Mayo Clinic. And Can
I ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I ask you about the condition? Like what happens when you get a flare up? What's the experience? Where's the pain? What happens?
Yeah, well, the autoimmune disorder is ulcerative colitis, which is kind of...
I know all about that one, actually.
Oh, do you? Really?
I haven't had it myself, but people very close to me have suffered from that to lesser or more degrees. So I know a bit about it.
Yeah, so it's not, nobody wants to talk about poo, but... But so just, massive runs and blood and pain, belly pain and stuff like that. And to the point where... I lost 30 pounds that I didn't actually really have to lose and was basically housebound. So I went up to Mayo Clinic to get a second opinion because I had it for over 20 years at this point. And my doctor was saying, you need to have your colon removed. And I was like, no, I'm not having my colon removed. That's not even an option. But finally I decided to go get a second opinion. And when I went to Mayo for that, they, I don't know if you know anything about how Mayo works, but whatever you're going there for, they put you through a complete battery of just every test you can imagine. And they found that I had a high fever and my heart rate was like 160. And so they said, well, we need to figure out what's going on with your heart before we can do anything else. So they, popped me in the hospital and did all these tests. I had a spinal tap that was done by a resident that was done wrong. And that's a whole other story. Oof. But anyway, I ended up like 3 days later having heart surgery. So I had the inflammation with autoimmune can be systemic. And anyways, there was an inflammation in my heart and the pericardium, the sac around it had hardened and become like bone. And then there was an infection and all this stuff. So they had to remove the pericardium. And then didn't even address the ulcerative colitis. So I went home on steroids, tried to get off them, ended up in even worse shape. And so 5 weeks later, I was back up at Mayo having my colon removed. Yeah.
So they cracked your chest open and then 5 weeks later still?
Yeah. So literally I had an incision, from the top of my clavicle to below, where the xiphoid process is there. Yes. And then I had like 2 inches and then I had another scar the rest of the way down.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I couldn't even take a shower without laying down to take a nap, or not a nap, but like a rest in the middle of it.
Wow.
So
Julie.
Yeah. Yeah.
When was that? When did that happen?
That was in the late 90s. And in the recovery of that, one of my friends who was a yoga teacher, she's like, can I come over and we'll do some yoga? And I'm like, no, I don't think I can. And she's like, no, it'll be fine. I'm not going to make you move. We're just going to breathe. And I said, okay. So she came and had me lay on my back flat out, which was actually quite uncomfortable with all those incisions. And, we just did pranayama. And I felt so different after those times that by the time I was well enough to go back, I thought, I have to tell people about this. Like, this is amazing. And yeah, so that was kind of what led me to do a teacher training. And I never used to admit this, but now that I've been teaching for a long time, I do. My first teacher training was Yoga Fit. So I went and got a certificate on a weekend.
You don't have to be ashamed of that. I know a lot of people who did Yoga Fit. I mean, it was a thing. I mean, and you had prior experience in fitness, so that's what Yoga Fit was for. It was kind of like a doorway in, right?
But I knew as soon as I left that weekend, I'm like, okay, this is not what we were doing in my bedroom. So,
isn't that interesting though? Well, wait, I'm sorry. That is very interesting contrast though, right? Because you have this what sounds like authentic experience of yoga with this person who helps you through like this inflection point in your life, which I think is what yoga is really about.
For sure.
And then you decide, okay, I got to share this with other people, become a yoga teacher. And so you go do the first training that's sort of like closest to what you know. And it's something very different.
Very different. So, so then I started to realize that I needed to look for a teacher. And that led me through a few different things. I was first drawn to power vinyasa, which is so funny because it just fed into my whole paradigm of beating my body into submission. It felt very punishing, but I loved it.
I know. And isn't it interesting though, because that's not what you were doing with your friend.
Exactly.
Either.
Exactly.
But it was what was most popular. That's what I talked with Dave and Stacy about. It was like the move to make at a certain point.
Yeah. I followed Baron Baptiste.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that's where everybody was going.
Yeah. So I liked Baron Baptiste. I followed him around a little bit. And, but it just wasn't, well, I didn't know it at the time, but it really wasn't what I was looking for. I guess I did know because I still was looking. And
so let me backtrack just a second though. So you must have healed pretty good if you were doing power vinyasa work, right?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like the next month or anything like that. I mean,
it took a little while.
But I knew instinctively that I had to move. Like I remember even after my heart surgery, when you have heart surgery like that, you've got a chest tube on both sides, tubes coming out of between your ribs, and then IV. And I just remember getting out of bed and just walking circles around the ward, knowing intuitively that was going to help me heal. Mm. And even after the other surgery, same, So I think I probably did. And then too, with the breathing work and stuff I was doing, I think I did heal pretty well and pretty quickly. Mm. But a couple of years later, I had some of the scar tissue from the initial surgeries looped around one of my ovaries and part of my small bowel. Mm. And it was all the stuff that I had been done at university hospitals. And we just went to the local kind of community hospital, and they thought I was there looking for morphine. So it took them 3 days to figure out what was going on. And by that time it had started leaking and I had peritonitis. So when they finally did do this resection, it had to heal open. So this one was kind of where my first scar was from the colon surgery, but they only stitched in the innermost layer, and then we had to stuff it with gauze until it healed. And I remember, honest to God, being at a Baron Baptiste workshop, and it was I think it was at one of the yoga conferences back when they used to have those, with gauze coming out of the top of my yoga pants. I mean, that's what a freak I was at that time. It was so, looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I trying to prove? It was crazy.
I mean, that's quite a lot of medical intervention to have to go through in your life,
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And I actually know what you mean about that open wound thing, because I had my best friend who was probably, I believe, my second person I ever taught yoga to. At some point early on, I was seeing him once a week, and then he had a polynoidal cyst at the base of his spine. Oof. And he had surgery and had it removed, and he had been given very strict orders to stay in bed for a week.
Yeah.
And he didn't follow orders. And then there was a clot. And so they had to open it up, like you say. Yeah. And then you had to pack it with gauze, and it had to heal as an open wound. Mm. And he couldn't afford to have some nurse come to dress his wound every day. So I became the one to do it.
Oh, what a good friend.
But it was initially totally freaked me out, because I could look right into it and see his spine. But it eventually became quite amazing. If you cut a chunk of a human body out, it grows back.
Yeah. Bodies are amazing.
Watching that process actually made me come to feel a new reverence for some kind of intelligence that's at work in our systems.
Definitely.
All that shit can happen to you, and you can still heal and be talking to me right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
That's crazy and amazing.
It is amazing. And it took me a long time, many years, to get to the point where I could appreciate my body for all that it had seen me through, because it's easy to fall into the victim trap when you go through a lot of stuff like that. Why me? I don't know. It's not super useful, but it took me a really long time to stop being angry not angry at life, but angry just specifically at my body.
Well, you got dealt a pretty rough hand. You got every reason to. I think that would be a natural process of working through it. That even whatever tragedies I've had to deal with, it doesn't seem fair at first. It's not fair. Yeah, it's actually not fair.
No, yeah. It's not fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is. But it just is. And one of the interesting things that happened through all that time was after my heart surgery. When you come out of heart surgery, you're intubated until they see that you're waking up, and then they'll take it out. So you're conscious when they take the tube out. And so I woke up and I was like, okay, and they took it out. And the first thing I thought of was, or I had this kind of, I don't know if it was an awakening to or whatever. But I knew that my life was never going to be the same after that. I just looked around and I'm like, everything's different. Everything's changed.
Yeah.
And it had.
And I was just thinking about what you said earlier when you said that what you were doing before was about trying to control your body. Mm-hmm. and how after, I don't know, even just having to deal with my own chronic pain issues that I have. You can't control your body. Like you can be in relationship to it, you know, but you can trying to control it has a backlash that is counterproductive to well-being. At least it was for me.
Absolutely. And well, I think those 2 surgeries were the backlash for me, you know, for sure. Yeah.
Well, you don't mean that they were like directly related, or it was just like more like from like a spiritual karmic standpoint or something?
I think, from a spiritual perspective. I mean, because that was my thing. Like, I'm going to control this body with this, you know, rigorous physical regimen or whatever, and not pay attention to what might be underlying these issues or other issues in my life or anything. And it was like, okay, Jules, here you go. Boom. There's the hammer. Time to look around a little bit. And that's exactly what happened.
All right. But when you first started out, you're doing power vinyasa. Are you really doing that while doing power vinyasa?
No. I
mean, so there was still, it took a while. It was still stuck to you, right? That pattern.
Was still, you know, like I said, I was there with gauze hanging out of my yoga pants, and it wasn't really, you know, okay. So I guess you want to hear the whole story?
Yeah, I want to hear the whole story.
All right. So I was, you know, practicing, and there was a little studio in the town where I lived, or the suburb I lived just outside of Chicago. And I used to go there for classes, and there was a woman there whose classes I liked, and she was a student of Barron's. And so I went to her class one day, and the owner of the studio at that time was an Ashtanga teacher. And he was mean, you know, like I really didn't like his classes. I always felt kind of small when I left there. And so I went out, and wanted to go to my friend's class, and rolled out my mat, and I was all ready to go. And the owner walks out, and he was filling in for her. And I was like, oh, you know, there was just no way for me to leave gracefully. So I stayed. And he was completely different, like just a completely different guy. And I was so intrigued. He was a young guy. And I stayed after class, and I'm just like, what happened to you? And he's like, oh man, like I met this teacher. He's awesome. We're all going to Boston this weekend. You have to go. And I'm like, my first thought was, I don't even really know you or like your classes or anything. And, but I was so intrigued that I actually went, and I didn't know anybody except this guy and his sister, who I did actually really like. She was really sweet. And that was an Anusara workshop. So it was in Boston.
Friend? It was John Friend?
Yeah, it was John Friend.
Shit.
I know. So
see, but how common is that? I've heard that same, you know, I was doing vinyasa, then John came around, and
I think the thing with the, you know, the power yogis and the Ashtangis particularly were drawn to Anusara is, that it was a strong physical practice, but it wasn't as punishing. You know, there was an intelligence in the system, you know, in the biomechanics. There was like grace
and all these other to grace and all this other stuff in there that wasn't in the Ashtanga stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the spirit, the Tantra, you know, and that's one of the big gifts of that system that, you know, I have taken with me. And some of the technique stuff, I don't call it alignment anymore because it gets such a bad rap. But
like, what do you mean, like the spirals?
Well, not even, so when you go to the gym, you know, and you do squats and stuff, there's technique that helps keep you safe. And I think in yoga, that exists to a certain extent too. And it's, you know, they're guiding principles that you can apply within the parameters of individual bodies. That's how I look at it. So it's not like everybody has to be cookie cutter doing it the same way, but there are things that help, you know, to go deeper if that's what you want to do, or, you know, just have a better experience.
Well, I think that's very interesting. Let's put a pin in that. Let's come back to the technique question, because I think that there's a good bit of conversation for us to have there. I'm curious about that. But before we get to a conversation about technique, let's stay with some history first.
Okay.
And so you go to meet John, and what's your experience? Does he win you over? Does he entice you?
Well, my experience was, so at that stage, and I was still a newish teacher, I was feeling a bit like a round peg in a square hole. Like I went through this whole thing where I think a lot of teachers do. I actually talked about this in an Instagram live thing or a TV thing I did the other day, where I felt like I had to wear this persona of a yoga teacher or something somehow. And, like be a vegetarian, which I wasn't at that time. And, like, I don't know, wear Birkenstocks or whatever. And so I went to this thing and, the Anusara stuff was always themed. And the theme of that weekend was unity and diversity. And it was my first exposure, excuse me, to any kind of Tantra. And I came from a really fundamentalist Christian background. So that's a whole other topic that I had left, excuse me, and was a spiritual person, knew that paradigm didn't fit. So I was kind of looking for a way to plug my spirituality back in. And anyway, unity and diversity, that we're all different and it's on purpose and these differences should be celebrated. And I was like, wow, that really resonated with me.
That's interesting. People don't usually associate Anusara yoga with that, but they were doing workshops like that at that time that you went to.
Yeah. And so I liked that. And then, the yoga, like I did Lotus for the first time and, at that workshop, and there was just a feeling, there was a vibe that was really, it felt like family. I wasn't part of it, but I watched it and I thought, okay, this may be what I've been looking for.
Well, that is very interesting that you say that part of the draw was the tantric influence or the philosophy that was there. And we should clarify that at the earlier iteration of Anusara, there was one version of Tantra offered.
Right.
It did change later on. I've had people on the show to talk about that before. But that early version was like what, Kashmir Shaivism or whatever. Or
right. I think he was still with Guru
non-dual stuff. And that I could totally, me too. I had this like Judaic upbringing or whatever, and then wanted to find a way into spirit that didn't feel like dogma or wasn't imposed upon me.
Right.
That I was the arbiter of or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
And Tantra was sort of like a potential vehicle, actually became the vehicle.
In
for many ways, right?
For me too. Yep.
And all right, so you go to that workshop, you get that exposure. What happens next? Do you do Anusara training?
Yeah, well, at that time, there wasn't really training, like it was Yoga Alliance, I think when did Yoga Alliance start? Like 2000 around there?
I think it was like late 90s, 97, maybe was like the very first year. Cause that's when my teacher did hers that first year. I remember.
Yeah. So it was really basically, we just followed John around and we clocked up hours with him. And then, like we'd go on these weekends and sometimes like Krishna Das would be there, or Douglas Brooks or Paul Muller Ortega or Sally, like we got this education that, and I've had conversations with other, friends who are still friends who were part of that time. It's like, we had no idea the value of what was happening at that time. It was, Benji and Heather Wertheimer and Dave Stringer and, like it was incredible. And
it really was. I mean, I got to guess for a moment because there was a golden time. Like you're referring to like a golden period, which I caught the tail end of.
Yeah.
Where there was just real innovators and people making this bridge, like going to India and meeting gurus or studying and then coming back and opening centers and doing these workshops. But we hadn't fallen into the 200-hour training model as much as we ended up doing eventually.
Exactly.
And the centers weren't like spa environments yet or anything, so it was still kind of grassroots and kind of had a grit or something. Yeah.
And there was just I'm going to use that word that you've been using lately, but there was a magic about it. Like it was, it was a really potent time. And, looking back, we're like, geez, we sat under the teaching of these amazing teachers.
Which we have to say, and I hate that I have to say it, a lot of them kind of ended up not being everything we thought they were going to be, right?
Well, fair enough.
I mean, that's maybe not the conversation for today, but it is a thing. I mean, I just want to make sure that we're not too glowing of this golden period, because while there was something golden about it, there was like, for you and me, and I think a lot of other people, like a real growth, and it was a time of experimentation and discovery, and there was a lot of possibility.
Right.
At the same time, there was, there was a shadow. There was a shadow to it, that golden time that we're referring to, which a lot has been of, before the pandemic happened. That's what a lot of it was. There's a lot of reckoning taking place.
Definitely. And rightfully so, needed to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you're doing all these workshops with John. You're following him around. You're in America. Are you teaching?
I am teaching.
Like what? Where are you teaching? Are you doing your own classes? Are you teaching at centers? What's the scene like?
I started at centers, and taught at a couple in the city and then one in the suburbs, and got tired of that, actually, the whole political bit. And so I had a friend who had a dance studio, so I hired her space and just started doing my own thing. But in the middle of that, and I know you have a connection here because I talked to Jenna this week.
Okay.
I was teaching at United Airlines.
Okay. Wow. Jenna at United. That's so funny.
So I started there when I was talking to her a while back, and we were trying to remember if it was just before or just after 9/11. I think it was just after. She thinks it was just before. But in any case, I was a new teacher, and one of my students at one of the studios I was teaching at worked in sales at United, and she wanted to get yoga into United Airlines. So she invited me to come and do this lunch and learn thing. Mm-hmm. And so I did it, and, it was great. And we started this class, and there were 50 people in the class. And so I had this class twice a week at United Airlines where, they just paid $10 a class, and I helped them buy props and all this stuff. And
what? They only paid you $10 a class when you were teaching for United Airlines?
Well, the students were paying themselves, so it wasn't like the company.
Because I had corporate gigs, and those were usually like pretty good paid because they had like HR budgets and stuff. But you were
it ended up being pretty good pay because there were 50 people in the class, so it was all right. But the room that we were in had been the war room, or like the command central during 9/11.
Oh,
so
weird.
Yeah.
But I guess kind of cool, actually, to put yoga into that space. Maybe interesting.
I think it was. But, there were just these people, and they weren't like, advanced yogis or anything like that. They were stressed out, traumatized United employees who were trying to make sense of this tragedy. We all were kind of seeing if yoga could help us make some sense of it. And looking back now, it was such a cool time because I didn't know enough to get in the way of the yoga doing its job,
Yes, that innocence sometimes works in our favor, doesn't it?
Totally. So it's probably some of the best teaching I've done, and I still keep in touch with a lot of those people. And Jenna and a couple others did my teacher training that I went back to Chicago to do a couple of years ago. And so it's.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.